Sentinel Sports Central will be going over a college football game preview and prediction on one of the big SEC matchups coming up in Week 9 of this 2020 season, and that's going to be between the LSU Tigers and Auburn. And this is going to be a very intriguing matchup, and it's going to be a very important one for both these teams moving forward. Obviously, it's been a very unexpected season for both these teams so far. Both teams are actually unranked going into this matchup, which is kind of crazy to think about considering last season both teams were national contenders, let alone LSU was your national champion. So it's just been crazy seeing both these teams have as many losses as they've had so far. And so this is going to be a very important matchup for both these teams in deciding which team will be better in the second half of the season, and also for some momentum, because both teams definitely need some good momentum moving forward as well right now. And we're going to be going over a full college football game preview and prediction on this game here in this video, starting out with your team trends. And last week, LSU beat South Carolina 52-24. Big win there for LSU. They really needed that one, and honestly, in general, LSU kind of looked like how many expected them to look this entire season in that matchup against South Carolina. And as for Auburn, they had a close one to Ole Miss, but they still got the win 35-28. So both teams have got one-game winning streaks right now. LSU is 2-2, and Auburn is 3-2. So both teams have combined for 4 losses so far through only 9 games, which is something crazy to think about once again, considering how great both teams were last season. I'm sure no one would have expected this. Like, I know I didn't. I mean, in this offseason, I actually expected both of these teams to possibly be like 9 to 10 win teams in a normal season. So it's crazy to see both these teams struggling as much as they are so far. But when you got Bo Nix not playing very well for Auburn at all, he's been really struggling so far this season. And then for LSU, I mean, both quarterback situations here for both these teams have just been really rough. I mean, if you look at LSU, Miles Brennan at quarterback he's been okay, but he has been nothing like Joe Burrow. That is pretty evident by how LSU's been doing so far this season. Joe Burrow was just such a big part of this team last year. And, I mean, once again, looking at Joe Burrow's stats, that was pretty clear. But, yeah, it's just been insane how far LSU has dropped off this season so far. And it just shows how big of an impact player Joe Burrow was to this LSU offense and to this team in general. I mean, and once again, it was not just Joe Burrow that they lost. They lost a ton on the defensive side. I think they had the most draft picks that any team has really ever had in a very long time, or possibly forever. So it's been it was a lot of tough losses after the 2019 season for LSU, but I mean, it's just crazy seeing how much they dropped off so far. Games will be on Saturday, October 31st, 3:30 p.m. Eastern in Auburn. So Auburn will be your home team for this one. Spread currently says LSU by 2.5. ESPN FPI also has LSU 52%. Well, the Vegas prediction goes against both of those two, going with Auburn 27-23 being your final score. So LSU is favored in 2 and 3 of our sources, but I mean, yeah, it's kind of crazy thinking about how Auburn's got 3 wins and LSU's got 2 on the other hand. But LSU is favored by 2.5 once again in the spread right now, and this is being recorded pretty early on in the week, so those could change as the week goes on. But here's your stat comparison for this one. LSU is a clear leader in points per game for right now. They got 42 points per game, 30 points allowed, 344 pass yards a game, 141 rush yards, and then for yards allowed, they've got 344 pass yards allowed, and then 127 rush yards. So the passing offense for LSU has actually been the bright spot of this team, believe it or not, considering like 344 yards in an average game is actually really good. As for Auburn, they got 24 points per game, 25 points allowed, 221 pass yards a game, 164 rush yards, then 220 pass yards allowed, and 180 rush yards. So all around, yeah, both of these teams so far have put up some decent offensive yards. And I mean, in general, for Auburn especially, that is something that they do have to work on, especially on the defensive side, is making sure they don't allow that many yards. Because, I mean, LSU allowing 344 pass yards a game, yeah, you also can't do that. So both defenses have to improve in many areas. But here's our previous games for both these teams. LSU did beat South Carolina 52-24. They did take a loss to Missouri 41-45. That was a brutal loss for this team. Obviously, they'd already lost to Mississippi State earlier on in the season, so that kind of sealed the deal for them to get booted out of the rankings. But still, I mean, they're trying to bounce back from that. I definitely think if they can get a win here against Auburn, that could be a huge help, especially getting some big momentum moving forward into the rest of the season. But they did get a win against Vanderbilt on October 3rd, 41-7, which was a good win. Obviously, Vanderbilt is Vanderbilt. They're easily the worst team in the SEC, but still, I mean, yeah, they looked like they were improving at least. As for Auburn on the other side, they did beat Ole Miss 35-28, and then you also had a 22-30 loss to South Carolina in the previous week. So they did have a really bad loss there to South Carolina. But they also lost to Georgia on October 3rd, 6-27. And that was before beating Arkansas 30-28. And they also beat Kentucky in the first game of the season, 29-13. So, yeah, it's been a really weird season for Auburn. They've had a lot of close games. Their wins have not been very convincing. And I think Auburn in general is just kind of, they've just looked really sloppy in comparison to last season. If you look at Bo Nix in his true freshman season, he was much better last year than he has been so far this season, which is a bit concerning moving forward. But some key points for this one, both teams off to unexpected starts. Once again, we've already been over that. But LSU did look the best that they have all season so far last week. So that is something to consider there. They did look really good against South Carolina. And looking at how both teams did play South Carolina so far this season, LSU blew them out, while Auburn actually lost to them. So that is something you could look at if you wanted to compare both of these teams heading into this matchup. But Auburn, and honestly in general, both teams are really trying to build momentum right now because, football obviously is a game all about momentum. And, it's very important that you do get momentum moving forward, especially into the second half of the season, which is really important if you're wanting to make a good postseason position. But, yeah, very important game for both these teams, obviously. Once again, we've already been over that as well. It's just been a crazy season for both these teams. And I'm sure most teams are desperately wanting a big win right now. And I think LSU ends up getting it in the end. I think your halftime score is going to be 17-14. We will see Auburn lead. But in the final, your score is going to be 35-24. I've got LSU taking home this win here. I think LSU in general is the better team. Auburn has just had a lot of sloppy wins. If you look at the wins that both teams have had so far, Auburn does have 3, meanwhile LSU does have 2. But on the other side, Auburn's had 3 really close wins against mediocre teams. Like, they had a close win, a touchdown win over Ole Miss last week. They barely beat Arkansas, and that Kentucky win was not very convincing at all. So Auburn in general has just not looked good at all. And unless they change that drastically in this game, I just don't think that they get the win here. And then LSU on the other side, they had a great win against South Carolina last week. It looks like this offense is finally starting to click. So I've got LSU winning this one by 11. 35-24 is your final score. That being said, that wraps up my prediction on this one. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this game. Let me know your score predictions, all of that. But then again, thanks again for watching. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central, and I will see you all later.